year. I hope you were all ready for 2024. Well, as ready as we'll ever be. As a lot of people say, it's just a date in a timeline. It's all made up, so what difference does it make? But we know that it's embedded in our mindset to think ahead to the new year. So this isn't very long predictions. Still kind of snowed under with the basic kind of work. Just been feeling really exhausted. It's such a tiring time, I think. I think that for whether people went along with the narrative in 2020-21 or they didn't, it was exhausting for all of us, maybe more so for us because we felt so up against it all the time. So it's really draining. But anyway, forget about that. I want to talk about 2024. The big thing happening in terms of the planets this year is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. It's really going to affect us all, and I did a little thing on TikTok about that and on my Instagram, which I can give you a link to. But in terms of world events, I think it's really pivotal, particularly as the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction happens near Algol. Then Uranus moves forward and goes retrograde within a degree of Algol, and then will trigger Algol again, obviously once it's gone kind of direct and then pushed off through that degree again. Now, Algol is known as the most malevolent of all the fixed stars. It's associated with everything kind of bad. And last time Uranus was going back and forwards past Algol was in 41 and 42. And we know that that was a time of great human conflict. So the two big things, well, let's put it this way. List of the big things happening this year is Ukraine. All right. This is the year when I think Russia may make a move and look to annex parts of Ukraine, maybe the southern coast along the Black Sea, and take Odessa. I think there'll be lots more anxiety among the kind of Western allies, the rules-based people about this, and this will cause a great increase in friction and tensions, and things will reach a fever pitch in terms of the Ukraine area. We know they're already talking about conscription in Poland, more rumblings. We know that the SAS are involved, and although Ukraine has made heavy losses, they've kind of run out of enough people to fight. But they've also ended up depleting military stocks throughout Europe and also America. So all the kind of really important military stocks are way down, making it more difficult for any offensive to happen with Western support. But let's watch the space because they may be able to muster up something, and I'm sure they'll try. Another thing this Jupiter-Uranus thing is affecting is Israel, because Israel is a Taurus and their birthday, I think, is 14 May, but it's definitely being triggered by this particular transit. So I think we'll see a huge amount more tension in that area, an escalation of the war and an escalation of animosity towards Israel by many countries and by many individuals, particularly individuals in America who may in the past have been inclined to join the army to fight causes, now suddenly taking a step back. So there's a whole sea change in the narrative that the West has generally shared about Israel, with a lot of people now pushing back on that. But I do think that the other big thing, which I talked about in the book last year, peril at sea. I talked about the sinking of ships. Now we're beginning to see that feeding in now with the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea attacking ships. I think there'll be more attacks on ships in the Mediterranean, maybe by drones, and of course they're going to say it's backed by Iran, and by the Houthi rebels, which will say backed by Iran, attacks on shipping, Israeli ships from America, Britain, whatever. It could affect trade and that whole sea route, which would also play into the agenda because it'll cause prices to rise all over the world as it's more difficult to transport goods, which could be a theme. But it'll also mean it's getting closer and closer to America instigating some sort of attack on Iran or regime change on Iran or painting Iran as the big baddie. So we're definitely going to see an escalation of problems at sea, Red Sea, Mediterranean Sea, with sinking of ships, attacks on ships. This will affect worldwide economy, could push it over a precipice. On the other hand, it can also lead to this confrontation they're looking to provoke with Iran. But I think things are definitely hotting up in the entire Middle East area, also to do with Lebanon, Syria again, and obviously Iran. As you know, I talked about those themes before and a lot in the book, so let's leave it there for that one. Overall, I think the hugest thing in the news is going to be the demographic change. I think that's going to become even obviously it's a big theme in our circles, but I think even the normies are going to start to see how that's sort of wending its way in, and I see a big escalation of kind of movements of people, all right, and that will be shifting the political narrative in different countries. Now we're going to have a general election in the UK, also in America. Now apparently the intelligence services, the Five Eyes, don't want two Five Eyes country having an election at the same time. So although in the UK they're talking about an autumn election, apparently that can't really happen, or could, but it's a bit difficult with the Americans having their election at the same time because there's too much political instability in two Five Eyes nations, they say. But we know there's no instability because they choose the result, so whatever. But that is something to think about. I think it's pretty clear who's going to win. It'll be Trump, and then in the UK it'll be some sort of Labour, obviously. I don't think there's any way past that one, but does it really matter? Because there's very little difference between Starmer and Labour, except one's got his foot totally on the floor with the woke climate change etc. agenda, and Sunak's going a little bit easier because he has to, because he's a so-called conservative. But my other big theme for next year is a total change in the alternate media as we know it. I think a large chunk of the alternate media will become mainstream, and the rest of the alternate media will be obliterated. Now why I say that is we've seen some splits already because of the Israel scenario in the alternate media. Look at the UK column team. They've been together for so long. Suddenly sort of David Scott, who's very, very Zionist, he's gone off his own way. Patrick Hennison, who's more pro-Palestine, has gone his way, and apparently he's going to join with National Wire Patrick Howie, who used to go on InfoWars a lot. Now, Patrick Howie, he's also taken a step back from the kind of mainstream alternative media in America, and he's reassessing everything and taking a different viewpoint. Then we have someone like David Icke saying the other day that he cannot believe that people he's respected, and he's obviously referring to Alex Jones, for many years, are suddenly arse-licking Elon Musk. When I think David has his faults maybe, but what he's been very good on is pointing out that Elon Musk is not on our side. I remember when Trump was running for election in 2016, and they said Elon Musk had more in government subsidies than Donald Trump's entire net worth, which was $6 billion at the time. No one who's a threat to the system would get that much money. Then you think of all the things Musk's involved in, from Neuralink, Starlink, building these pathetic, container ship, self-contained little houses which no one in their right mind would aspire to live in. He does the boring technology they use at CERN. Got his finger in so many pies, and I've talked extensively about how I don't trust him, and I think Ike is right to warn against seeing this sort of person as a savior, right? Just because he's allowing a little bit of free speech. I think the reason he's allowed free speech on Twitter is a January the 6th moment. It's to ensnare and entrap people, or possibly to allow so much free speech that it allows organizations to say, hang on a second, this is terrible, we have to shut the whole thing down. And then, like Ike points out, Musk ends up, he was the hero, he was trying to give you his free speech, what a pity they all shut it down. So I do think that is just the so-called freedom on Twitter is just a big psyop. Yeah, so I think it's totally visible now how Alex Jones is compromised. It's in Sandy Hook and the money and the fact that, InfoWars have to go through the whole bankruptcy thing to keep going. He has got to mind his P's and Q's. He's got to know where his bread is buttered. He's talking in a totally different way to he used to. He's being disingenuous. Now, he does still have a variety of guests and the other presenters on InfoWars that will give you a different opinion, so it's not all bad. But his behavior as the lead person, probably the most noted person on InfoWars with the most clout, he is becoming just a brainless mouthpiece for Trump, whatever he does. And I think they're all going to, from Alex Jones, Tate, the whole shebang, are all going to push you in the direction of Trump's our savior, and that's going to be their whole theme for 2024. He probably will get in because I believe all these cases taking him off the ballot, it's all a hoax. And when he gets in, that'll be wonderful because people will relax and think it's all fine and he won't do anything. He's already talking of making that ghastly son-in-law of his Secretary of State. That's going to get us nowhere. Do you know that the son-in-law was going around telling everyone that Build the Wall was a hoax and that immigration wasn't going to be stopped? So, you're getting one message from one and one from another. Look in the background of that Jared Kushner's father, the 666 building in New York, but also that he was one of the pardons by Trump. I mean, he's got to check it past. It was either him or the uncle anyway. I'd have to look into it. Off the top of my head, I don't remember, but I know that someone in the Kushner family was pardoned by Trump. I mean, it's just not very savory what's going on. Look at Dr. Shiva. I think he was the guy who was campaign manager for RF Kennedy, but he pulled back from that when Kennedy so strongly hitched himself to supporting Israel. I mean, they don't have to support Palestine, but try and be a bit more nuanced on the subject. Take a step back, stay out of it. Don't be like lock, stop and barrel behind one side who clearly behaving in a way that is reckless. That whole area is the epitome of an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. Because the whole thing needs to be under control. Both sides are getting ridiculous. But given their history, Israel has more of a responsibility, also being a so-called democracy, to behave in a reasonable manner and apply reasonable force, bearing in mind no other country could behave in that particular way, using white phosphorus, not joining weapons conventions, not signing non-proliferation, everything they do, no other country would get away with it without them shouting for regime change. But in this case, it's the opposite. The country must be, lauded to the hilt. So, when RFK went that way, he lost a lot of supporters. And I think it was Dr. Shiva was his campaign manager. He stepped back. Now Del Bigtree has taken over as RFK's a campaign manager, which puts him exactly in the same category of the alternate media who are going to become very mainstream, while the real alternative, who probably are getting closer to the heart of the truth, are sidelined. And I'm sorry, Alex keeps going on the Chi-Coms this. China was a backward country 40 years ago. I mean, this plan has been hatched, goes back to Babylon, but in more recent times, it's certainly been well talked about throughout the last century, to suggest that China, when it was Japan and South Korea were the innovative countries in that region of the world. China was backward, now suddenly they're controlling everything. It's nonsensical. This plan goes back decades, centuries. Was it China behind the Russian Revolution? Was it China behind slavery? Is it China flooding the American southern border? No, it's not. I'm not trying to say China are perfect. They have their role to play. They run a regime where they're rolling out all the surveillance and the CCTV, but they're not at the genesis or the heart of this, and to say it is so is misleading people. So I would say we have a real split in the MAGA movement, and definitely more, like I say, this mainstream media, not the alternative becoming more mainstream. And I think one of the other flaws with Alex Jones is he likes to be popular. He likes to have people on like Russell Brand or Andrew Tate, or these people he feels elevate him, and they really don't. They detract because they're so obviously shills. There's a very good account called Thinking Slow, and he comes on Dellingpod, and he tracked on Twitter the number of times Russell Brand's account mentioned vaccines in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And the answer was like twice in a very roundabout way. The only time he started mentioning it was mid-2023. Are those people on our side? They go along with the John Campbells, the lot of them. They are all part of the deep state. I include Jack Posobiec, that awful Cernovich. I mean, there are plenty of them. I think I mentioned, hold on, who did I have here? Yeah, Jones, Rogan, another one, Tate, Russell Brand, Mark Stein, Tucker. I suppose he does reasonable work for an ex kind of mainstream guy. Katie Hopkins could be another one in there. Now, Stu Peters and that guy I used to call the noisy Canadian are taking a rather different route, which I don't know if it's purely manipulative or what. But then, like I could definitely say, a big split in the MAGA. So something else I don't get for all these people who are so pro-Israel in this narrative is, it wasn't so long ago when these same people on the kind of anti-narrative, were telling us that Israel had the harshest restrictions. They had this green pass. The people who wouldn't have the thing were heavily discriminated against. The police were really brutal. It was a very stressful situation. It was one of the tightest lockdowns. It was one of the worst sort of medical apartheids. Then people talk about this quote from Benjamin Netanyahu, where he said he was going to make the whole country lab rats for Pfizer. They couldn't stop telling you how bad it was. Now they tell you that same government, we must support them because they're totally in the right and they're telling the truth this time, and it's Hamas are bad. Now, do you think the government that was prepared to treat their own people so badly under the COVID tyranny are now telling you the absolute truth about everything that's going on with Hamas and are being totally reasonable and proportionate in their response against Palestinians, who they hate and have said so, and it's their sworn enemy? I mean, when they treat their own people like that, but, I just don't, I think there's a lack of logic there. Step back, support the people, never support the government, for goodness sake. It's a bad look, and it's illogical, especially from people on our side as well. Sorry for the haphazard nature of the broadcast, but got to grab the time where you have it, until I can get some more consistent time, hopefully, in January and February to do these broadcasts. The other thing I want to say is I'm reluctant to make any predictions about the economy, because I keep saying we're going to have this crash, and I've put forward certain dates. It never happens. It's such a slow motion crash, or perhaps there is more of a crash than we understand, but because the media don't report on it, it's not happening. Because that's the nature of today's reality, is if the media make a big hoo-ha about it, everyone perceives something's happening. But if the media are pretty silent on something, it may be happening and maybe you don't fully acknowledge it. But Lynn Forrester de Rothschild was on some CBS, one of these, fake stream media programs, saying that they're really urgent to implement this digital currency worldwide. So I think the next 2 years, there's going to be a big push towards digital currency, and therefore there'll have to be something to preempt that. So maybe during this April period, which is so significant because the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is going to trigger all these points like Algol, and maybe things are really hotting up Ukraine and Israel and Iran, maybe that's the time when they might engineer some sort of crash, although it's probably not going to happen in an election year, right? Because usually there's some sort of manipulation where they're going to give you promises of dropping interest rates and that. But then again, Gerald Celente says in an election year, they always have to promise to drop interest rates. And he said as soon as they drop the interest rates, that's going to cause the crash. So I'm not sure at this stage, but we will see. The other thing I want to warn you about is the sense of victory, because I think what's going to be promoted heavily in what I call now the alternative media gone mainstream, and I've mentioned all the people that I think are involved in that, they're going to be telling you we're doing great, we're winning. Elon Musk is allowing free speech, we're all got our platforms back, that's wonderful, there's pushback. They're also going to be giving you the idea that there's going to be some sort of justice in terms of the whole rollout of this thing, right? That's mainly going to be coming from people like Steve Kirsch, and it's going to be a nothing burger. Now, how I can convince you over this is remember after the 2020 election, remember all the hoopla and all these people like the Sidney Powells creeping out the woodwork and telling you about the Kraken and this explosive information, and My Pillow Man was doing a big expose, and then of course we had Carrie Lake with that, I think it was in the midterms, taking people to court, and she's always winning, it's going well, and then you never hear about it again. And there was that other guy, he was a billionaire, and he sounded like he had an accent from down south. His name was someone Lynn anyway, he was some lawyer, and he was talking about all the ins and outs and how eventually, they were going to overturn the election result. And then there was Gerald Flynn who had all these theories, and that other guy that used to come on, Cuban guy, well, he's not Cuban really, but Steve Pachenik, telling you all the stuff about the secret coding on the ballots, and they gave you all this false hope, right, that the election was going to be overturned, or there'd be some justice, or there'd be something would happen. In effect, nothing happened. Nothing. And it's going to be the same with COVID. There will be no justice for any of these people. Nothing will come out. Everything that's going to come out has already come out. For people like us who read between the lines, who are investigative. But for your NPCs and the general person, nothing's going to change. So no, I don't think there's going to be justice. And I think any talk of it is to give you a sense of winning, the same as Musk is meant to give you a sense of winning, the same as a Trump victory could give you the sense of winning. And it's all just meant to put you back to sleep, to mollify you, or to just take you out the game. Because a lot of people are already getting bored of this whole opposition trying to push the alternate narrative and push back. A lot of people are getting bored of it, so give them a victory, they go totally to sleep, then you bring everything in. Or put some of their heroes in power, let Musk win their confidence. It's a confidence trick, and people can't see it, right, with Musk. Well, they can't see it maybe because they're in on the confidence trick because they're all compromised as well. So that's another thing I wanted to say. Now, I have a subscriber who wrote to me on Instagram, and he wanted to know why the Americans overthrew the government in Iran in 1979. And I'd like to give my perspective, because I've asked a few people who should know, and I didn't get an answer, so I've come up with my own research on what I think. Now, they always fight against the people they're eventually put in. So in Afghanistan, they kind of installed the Taliban initially, didn't they, after the Russians left, because they were supporting Osama. Then they were apparently fighting the Taliban all these years, and now they've handed it back to the Taliban. Then there was the Vietnam, when they were fighting against the Viet Cong, the communists, but they eventually gave it over to them. Meanwhile, there was a nationalistic Buddhist movement in Vietnam who they could have helped take over, but no, they rather helped the communists take over, which is counterintuitive to what we thought the Vietnam War was about. In South Africa, there were other black leaders who weren't communist that could have taken over, but they supported Nelson Mandela. So you see, it's always counterintuitive what they're doing. But my idea is Iran stands out as a country in not the Arab world, because it's not Arab, but in the Muslim world, in that region. I'm not counting the Muslim world like Malaysia, for example. The Muslim world, North Africa, Middle East, whatever. Iran stands out as a particularly sophisticated country with high levels of education, good background in its history, being very advanced in mathematics, physics, astrology and astronomy, all that sort of stuff. So Iran is one of the more advanced countries, like I say, with a highly educated, sophisticated workforce. It represented a very big threat. So I think they needed to weaken Iran. That's why they sponsored Saddam Hussein to have that whole ridiculous war with Iran that was going on for most of the 80s, to weaken both countries, because both were potentially a threat. Because if all the Arab countries come together and unite with a common purpose, that's a big threat to America. So I think why they wanted to initiate the revolution in Iran in 79 was to bring in a more oppressive authoritarian regime that would stifle, development, and was easily able to control and would keep the country from reaching its full potential, which is what they want. And then they could get an antagonist in so they could support Saddam and create this war which depleted the resources and sucked up young male blood for many, many years in this ridiculous war going on in the 80s between Iran and Iraq. Or everything that goes on out there is to weaken the other countries, to strengthen Israel, because they have to divide and rule, right? So if you keep creating division among people, the most cohesive group is always going to come out on top, which is something they do in the Middle East, but they also do worldwide. So I think that was the whole strategy with 1979. Probably a lot more to it, a whole lot more ins and outs, but I hope I've given you something in answer to that question, because it was an interesting one, and I like to hear these questions. Anyway, I hope to come back to you soon with more on these exciting topics as we tread with trepidation into 2024.